The courtroom camera captured a moment that would break the internet and redefine entitlement. Victoria Ashford Wellington, dripping in diamonds worth more than most people's homes, stood before Judge Judy with the kind of arrogance that comes from never being told no. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at America's toughest judge as words spilled from her lips that would destroy her life forever. "Look, I don't need a lecture from someone who's essentially a servant to the television network." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the kind of death stare that had made millionaires weep on national television. But what happened next would turn Victoria, from socialite queen into the most hated woman in America, begging for mercy from the same judge she had just called a servant. Before we dive into the complete destruction of the most privileged Karen ever caught on camera, make sure to smash that like button if you're ready to see old money meet new consequences. Hit subscribe, because what Judge Judy reveals about Victoria's dark past will leave you absolutely speechless. Trust me, the downfall you're about to witness is so satisfying, you'll want to watch it again and again. But to understand how spectacularly Victoria Ashford Wellington's world was about to collapse, we need to rewind to the moment she walked through those courtroom doors, believing she was untouchable. This was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning in Judge Judy's courtroom, another small claims case, another quick resolution, another day of television justice. The case file seemed almost boring on the surface. Victoria Ashford Wellington versus Rosa Mendes, a dispute over a designer scarf allegedly stolen by a former housekeeper. The producers had scheduled it as a routine 15-minute segment. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary. They had no idea they were about to capture the most viral courtroom moment in daytime television history. Victoria Ashford Wellington wasn't just wealthy. She was generational wealth personified. Her great-grandfather built an oil empire in the 1920s. Her grandfather expanded into real estate. Her father multiplied the family fortune through hedge funds and political connections. Victoria herself had never worked a single day in her 48 years of life. She didn't need to. The family trust fund generated more monthly interest than most Americans earned in a year. But money hadn't bought Victoria class, empathy, or basic human decency. It had bought her something far more dangerous, the absolute conviction that other people existed to serve her needs, and that consequences were for ordinary people, not for Ashford Wellingtons. She arrived at the courthouse that morning in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes S-Class, wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. Diamonds glittered at her neck, wrists, and ears. Designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She swept through the courthouse hallways like visiting royalty, her Louboutin heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of entitlement. Court staff who encountered her that morning would later describe her behavior as shockingly dismissive. She snapped her fingers at the security guard, demanding he hurry up with the metal detector. She spoke to the receptionist without looking up from her phone. She even tried to cut the line of people waiting for courtroom assignments, loudly announcing that she didn't have time to wait with everyone else. This was Victoria's normal. This was how she treated the world every single day. And she genuinely believed this behavior was not only acceptable, but appropriate for someone of her social standing. Sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom was Rosa Mendes, a 42-year-old single mother of three who represented everything Victoria looked down upon. Rosa had immigrated to America 15 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. She had worked as a house cleaner, a restaurant server, a hotel maid, whatever it took to provide for her children. 5 years ago, Rosa had taken a position as Victoria's full-time housekeeper, believing the steady income and benefits would finally give her family stability. Those 5 years turned out to be a masterclass in humiliation. Victoria treated Rosa not as an employee but as property. She monitored her with cameras, called her at all hours for trivial demands, and criticized everything, from Rosa's accent to her clothing to the way she arranged flowers. Rosa endured it all because she needed the job, because her children needed health care, because single mothers without college degrees don't have the luxury of walking away from a steady paycheck, until the Christmas party incident. That night, Victoria accused her of theft in front of 50 guests, humiliating her so completely that Rosa's youngest daughter cried herself to sleep. Asking why the mean lady hated her mommy, that's when Rosa finally found the courage to quit. And that's when Victoria decided to teach her a lesson about what Happens to servants who forget their place. What neither woman knew was that Judge Judy had spent the previous night doing something she reserved only for special cases: deep research, background checks, and phone calls to former employees. She had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a simple scarf dispute. She had discovered secrets about Victoria that could trigger criminal investigations. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just workplace abuse, but a lifetime of privilege weaponized against the powerless. Victoria thought she was walking into a courtroom to punish an uppity housekeeper. She had no idea she was about to face the one authority figure in America who didn't care about her last name, her bank account, or her social connections. Judge Judy was ready, and Victoria Ashford Wellington's 48 years of never hearing the word no were about to end in the most public, most humiliating, and most devastating way imaginable. To truly understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold in that courtroom, you need to know exactly who these three people were and what had brought them to this explosive moment. Victoria Ashford Wellington was born into a world most people only see in movies. Her family's mansion in Connecticut had 14 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a staff of 12. She attended elite private schools where tuition cost more than a luxury car. Her 16th birthday party was featured in Town and Country magazine. She summered in the Hamptons, wintered in Aspen, and treated Europe like her personal playground. But here's what made Victoria truly dangerous. She had never faced a single real consequence in her entire privileged life. Failed a class? Daddy made a donation and suddenly she passed. Got caught shoplifting as a teenager? The family lawyer made it disappear. Wrecked 3 cars before she turned 21? Insurance and influence made those problems vanish like smoke. By 48, Victoria had perfected the art of wielding her wealth as a weapon against anyone she deemed beneath her. And in Victoria's world, that meant almost everyone. Her reputation in Greenwich society was legendary for all the wrong reasons. She had been through 47 housekeepers in just 10 years. 47. Let that number sink in. That's a new housekeeper every 2.5 months. Former employees who dared to speak anonymously described a pattern of psychological abuse that was truly disturbing. Victoria would hide items, then accuse staff of stealing them. She would leave messes deliberately to test if they'd be cleaned. She installed cameras in every room, including bathrooms, claiming it was for security. One former chef reported that Victoria made her taste every dish before serving, not for quality control, but because she genuinely feared being poisoned by the help. But Victoria's abuse extended far beyond her household staff. Restaurant servers knew her name and dreaded seeing her walk through the door. She had gotten at least 7 people fired over the years by complaining to managers about imagined slights. Store clerks had learned to simply give her discounts to avoid her tantrums. Even police officers in her wealthy neighborhood recognized her number. Having responded to dozens of noise complaints she filed against neighbors whose children dared to play outside. This wasn't just someone having bad days. This was a systematic pattern of using privilege as a weapon to punish anyone who didn't bow down to her perceived superiority. Now, let's talk about Rosa Mendes, the woman Victoria had targeted for destruction. Rosa's journey to America had been driven by a mother's desperate love. Back in Mexico, her children faced limited opportunities, struggling schools, and an uncertain future. She made the heartbreaking decision to leave them temporarily with her mother, promising to send for them once she established herself in America. Those first years were brutal. Rosa worked 3 jobs simultaneously, sleeping only 4 hours a night, sending every spare dollar back home. She cleaned office buildings at night, served breakfast at a diner in the morning, and did laundry services in the afternoon. After 3 years of this punishing schedule, she finally had enough saved to bring her children to America. The position with Victoria seemed like an answered prayer: good pay, health benefits, regular hours, and the promise of the stability her family desperately needed. Rosa believed that working for a wealthy family meant professionalism and respect. She had no idea she was walking into 5 years of systematic humiliation that would test every ounce of strength she possessed. The courtroom doors opened, and Victoria Ashford Wellington made her entrance as if she were walking a red carpet at the Met Gala. Her designer heels clicked against the floor with deliberate authority. She didn't just walk to the plaintiff's table, she glided, her chin lifted at an angle that screamed superiority, her eyes barely acknowledging anyone around her. Rosa sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands folded, her posture radiating a quiet dignity that 5 years of abuse hadn't managed to break. She wore her best dress, purchased from Target with careful consideration of her limited budget. The contrast between the two women couldn't have been more stark or more symbolic. Judge Judy entered with her characteristic no-nonsense energy, and the case began. Ms. Ashford Wellington, you're suing Ms. Mendes for $5,000, claiming she stole a designer scarf from your home. Tell me what happened. What followed was a masterclass in entitled delusion. Victoria launched into her testimony with the dramatic flair of someone performing for an audience she assumed would be sympathetic. Your Honor, this woman worked in my home for 5 years. I trusted her with access to my personal belongings, my family heirlooms, my entire life. And how does she repay that trust? By stealing a limited edition Hermes scarf worth $5,000. She paused for effect, clearly expecting gasps of sympathy. Instead, Judge Judy's expression remained completely neutral. Continue, the judge said evenly. These people, Victoria began, and the way she emphasized those 2 words made several audience members visibly cringe. They come into our homes and we treat them like family. We pay them generously. We give them opportunities they'd never have otherwise. And this is how they show gratitude. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly. These people? Victoria, completely missing the warning sign, doubled down. You know what I mean. People who need these positions. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ms. Mendes, Judge Judy said, turning to Rosa. Tell me your side. Rosa's voice trembled slightly as she began, but her words carried a quiet strength that commanded the room's attention. Your Honor, I worked for Mrs. Ashford Wellington for 5 years. I cleaned her home 6 days a week. I took care of her things like they were my own. Better than my own, actually. She paused, gathering her courage. The scarf she's talking about, I asked if I could borrow it for a job interview. I was looking for a second job because I needed money for my daughter's dental work. Mrs. Ashford Wellington said yes. She told me I could borrow it. That's a lie, Victoria snapped, her voice sharp. Judge Judy's hand came up instantly. You will not interrupt in my courtroom, Ms. Ashford Wellington. You'll get your turn to respond. Victoria's face flushed red, but she fell silent, clearly unused to being told what to do. Rosa continued, her voice steadier now. I returned the scarf the next day, cleaned and perfectly folded. 2 weeks later, after I gave my notice to quit, she called the police and reported it stolen. She told them I never returned it. And why did you quit, Ms. Mendes? Judge Judy asked, leaning forward slightly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained firm. Because I couldn't let my children see their mother being treated like she was nothing anymore. Judge Judy's eyes moved between the 2 women, and anyone who had watched her show for years knew exactly what that calculating look meant. She had already made her decision. Now she was simply giving Victoria enough rope to hang herself with. Ms. Ashford Wellington, let's talk about your relationship with Ms. Mendes during her employment. How would you describe the way you treated her? Victoria adjusted her posture, clearly believing this was her moment to shine. I treated her exactly as an employer should treat an employee. I was fair but firm. I had high standards because I pay for high-quality work. High standards, Judge Judy repeated, her tone completely flat. Tell me about these high standards. Well, for example, I expected punctuality. I expected attention to detail. I expected respect for my property and my privacy. Basic professional expectations that anyone in the service industry should understand. Judge Judy pulled out a piece of paper from her folder. Is it true that you called Ms. Mendes at 2 a.m. to pick up your dry cleaning? Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Once or twice, perhaps, when I had an emergency. When you employ someone full-time, they need to be available when you need them. At 2 a.m. for dry cleaning? Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think you understand the demands of maintaining a household of my caliber. These things require round-the-clock attention. The audience murmured disapprovingly, but Victoria seemed to interpret it as validation rather than criticism. Judge Judy pressed forward. Let's talk about the scarf incident specifically. You're saying Ms. Mendes stole this scarf, Judge Judy began, but she claims she asked permission to borrow it, and you said yes. Which is it? Victoria's expression shifted, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her polished exterior. Your Honor, let me be completely honest with you. Yes, she asked. And yes, I initially said she could borrow it. But when she gave notice that she was quitting, without proper warning, without considering how her departure would inconvenience me, I changed my mind. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Victoria seemed to realize she'd said something deeply problematic, but her arrogance wouldn't let her back down. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair. You changed your mind after she'd already borrowed it and returned it? Exactly. She needed to learn that actions have consequences. You can't just quit on people like me without repercussions. These service workers need to understand their obligations to their employers. People like you, Judge Judy repeated slowly, her voice sharpening to a razor's edge that made even the audience hold its breath. What exactly do you mean by people like you, Ms. Ashford Wellington? And that's where Victoria made the mistake that would define the rest of her life. She laughed, a short, condescending laugh that cracked through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Your Honor, let's not play games. My family has been a pillar of Connecticut society for 4 generations. We employ dozens of people. We contribute to the community. People in my position have certain expectations about loyalty and respect from those who work for us. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but a dangerous spark flickered in her eyes. The kind that longtime viewers knew meant one thing: judgment was coming. I see, Judge Judy said, her tone deceptively calm. And do you believe that Ms. Mendes, as your employee, owed you a different standard of respect than you owed her? Victoria didn't hesitate. Frankly, yes. That's the nature of an employer-employee relationship. There's a hierarchy, a natural order. She works for me, not the other way around. Judge Judy folded her hands neatly on the desk. So, in your view, Ms. Mendes was beneath you? In the professional sense, absolutely. That's just reality, Your Honor. Some people serve and some people are served. It's how society functions. The words hung in the air like toxic gas. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Judy's voice dropped into that dangerously quiet register that longtime viewers knew meant only one thing. Someone was about to be obliterated. Ms. Ashford Wellington, she said slowly, let me ask you something. What do you think I do for a living? Victoria blinked, caught off guard. You're a judge? On television. That's right, Judy said. I work for a television network. They pay me to do a job. Does that make me a servant in your view? And then came the fatal mistake. The one that would be replayed millions of times online, stitched into reaction videos, memes, and compilations titled, The Day Judge Judy Ended a Socialite. Victoria rolled her eyes. Look, I don't need a lecture from someone who's essentially a servant to a television network. You're paid to do a job, just like Rosa was paid to do hers. Let's not pretend you're any different from her. Can we just get to the ruling so I can get back to my actual life? The silence that followed wasn't mere quiet. It was a vacuum, the soundless void that exists in the instant before a bomb detonates. 47 seconds. That's how long it took for Victoria Ashford Wellington's entire world to collapse. Judge Judy rose from her chair slowly, deliberately, like a volcano preparing to erupt. Every motion was controlled, every second stretched taut with the kind of tension that made the entire courtroom forget to breathe. Every person in that courtroom held their breath, sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable. A servant, Judge Judy repeated slowly, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of judicial authority. You just called me a servant. Victoria's confidence flickered for the first time, but her arrogance, her oldest ally, wouldn't let her retreat. I simply meant that we both work for someone. There's nothing wrong with... Be quiet. The 2 words sliced through Victoria's protest like a blade through silk. You've talked enough, Judge Judy said. Now you're going to listen. She reached for a thick folder on her desk. The sound of paper shifting filled the silence as Victoria watched, her face draining of color. Mrs. Ashford Wellington, Judy began, her tone crisp and cutting. Since you've decided to lecture me about understanding my place, allow me to educate you about yours. She opened the folder and held up the first document. I've spent 25 years serving justice. You've spent 48 years serving only yourself, and I'm about to show everyone exactly what that looks like. This designer scarf you claim is worth $5,000, she continued, holding up a photo, has been authenticated by 3 separate experts. It's a counterfeit, worth approximately 200. Victoria's jaw fell open, but no sound came out. "Oh, I'm not finished," Judy said, her voice now as cold as steel. "I've done something I rarely do. I contacted your previous employees." Victoria's eyes widened. "In the past 8 years, you've filed 13 small claims cases against former household staff," Judge Judy said, flipping through the pages. 13. Every single one filed within days of them quitting. Every single one claiming theft. Every single one either settled or dismissed because you couldn't prove your accusations. You could hear the faint hum of the cameras in the silence that followed. No one dared move. "This isn't about a scarf, is it, Mrs. Ashford Wellington?" Judge Judy said, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "This is about punishing Ms. Mendes for daring to quit, for refusing to tolerate your abuse, for believing she deserved even a shred of respect you were never willing to give." Judge Judy held up another document, and Victoria visibly flinched. "Here's my personal favorite," Judy said, her tone razor-sharp. "Text messages between you and your friend Amanda Blackwell, sent 2 days after Ms. Mendes quit. I'll read them out loud for everyone." She cleared her throat and began to read. "That ungrateful woman actually quit without notice. I'm going to sue her for that scarf and make sure she never works in Greenwich again. These people need to learn loyalty." The audience gasped audibly. Rose's hands flew to her mouth in disbelief. "But wait," Judge Judy continued, her voice turning absolutely glacial. "There's more." She lifted another page. "The IRS has had you under investigation for 6 years for failure to pay proper payroll taxes for household employees. 6 years, Mrs. Ashford Wellington. You've been paying people under the table, denying them proper benefits, and pocketing the tax savings." The room went dead silent. "That's not just unethical," Judy continued. "That's criminal." Victoria's body began to shake. All her earlier confidence, the smug superiority, the calm poise, evaporated like morning mist. Judge Judy leaned forward, eyes blazing with precision and purpose. "You called me a servant," she said quietly. "Let me tell you the difference between us. I serve justice. I serve the law. I serve the truth. You, Mrs. Ashford Wellington, serve nothing but your own grotesque sense of entitlement." She picked up her gavel. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath. "Judgment for the defendant," she declared. "You don't get a penny. In fact, you're going to pay Ms. Mendes $15,000 in punitive damages for malicious prosecution, emotional distress, and abuse of the legal system." The gavel came down with the finality of a guillotine blade, and in that single strike, 48 years of Victoria Ashford Wellington's consequence-free existence ended. The echo of the gavel hadn't even faded before her world began to collapse. The transformation was immediate, spectacular, and total. Even the veteran court staff, who'd seen thousands of meltdowns, stood frozen. Victoria's face cycled through emotions faster than a traffic light. Shock white, anger red, panic gray. Her flawless makeup couldn't hide the reality hitting her for the first time in her life. Real, public, irreversible consequences. "Wait," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Wait, you can't be serious. $15,000? For what? I'm the victim here. She stole from me." Judge Judy didn't even blink. Her expression remained carved from stone. "Ms. Ashford Wellington," she said evenly, "I just explained to you in detail that she didn't steal anything. But apparently listening isn't one of your strengths." "That's not fair." Victoria's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "You clearly don't understand my situation. Do you have any idea who my family is?" Judge Judy met her gaze with devastating calm. "Oh, I know exactly who your family is," she said. "And I know exactly what you are," Judge Judy said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're a bully who uses money as a weapon. You're an abuser who hides behind wealth and privilege. And in my courtroom, none of that matters." Victoria shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled over. Her designer handbag slipped from her hand, spilling its contents across the floor. Makeup compacts, credit cards, and ironically, several luxury store receipts scattering like confetti at the world's worst celebration. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her own outrage. Gone was the polished socialite. In her place stood a woman unraveling in real time. "I came here for justice, and instead I'm being attacked by someone who doesn't understand how the real world works. You're supposed to protect people like me from frauds and thieves like her." The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even Judge Judy seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the outburst. "People like you," Judy repeated slowly, her tone laced with finality. "Let me make something very clear, Miss Ashford Wellington. People like you are exactly why I love my job. Because every once in a while I get to remind entitled bullies that money doesn't buy immunity from accountability." Then, with chilling precision, she reached for one last document. The look on her face said everything. This was the knockout blow she had been saving. "Ms. Ashford Wellington," Judge Judy said, "I'm doing something I very rarely do. I'm forwarding the evidence of your IRS violations and your pattern of labor law abuses to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution. Your little game of punishing employees who dare to quit ends today." That was the moment Victoria completely shattered. The tears began as a shimmer in her eyes, but within seconds they streamed down her face, dragging her carefully applied makeup into dark streaks that made her look like a melting wax figure. Her entire body trembled as the reality of her downfall crashed over her like a collapsing building. "Please," she sobbed, her voice stripped of all arrogance. "Please, Your Honor, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said about you being a servant. I was just upset. I made a mistake. Please don't do this to me." The desperation in her voice was raw. This was the same woman who had strutted into the courtroom treating everyone like insects beneath her designer heels, now reduced to begging for mercy like someone pleading at the gates of judgment. Judge Judy watched her with the calm detachment of a scientist observing a predictable reaction. "Oh, now you're sorry," she said evenly. "Now you want to show remorse. Where was this attitude when you were calling me a servant? Where was this humility when you described Rosa as these people who need to learn their place?" Victoria reached out toward Judge Judy, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I'll apologize to her. I'll apologize to everyone. Please, I can't afford $15,000 right now. My family will disown me if they find out about this." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The woman who had just spent 20 minutes bragging about her family's wealth and social standing was now claiming poverty. Judge Judy leaned forward one final time, delivering the killing blow with surgical precision. "Ms. Ashford Wellington," she said, her voice firm, "you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. When you treat people like servants, when you abuse your power, when you weaponize the legal system against the vulnerable, eventually you meet someone who doesn't care about your last name or your bank account. Today I'm that someone." She picked up her gavel for the final time. "The judgment stands. Ms. Mendes is awarded $15,000 in punitive damages. You will also pay her legal fees totaling $8,000. Total judgment $23,000. Additionally, you are ordered to cease and desist any further contact with Ms. Mendes or members of her family. Any violation will result in criminal harassment charges." The gavel came down with the sound of thunder. Victoria Ashford Wellington collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking from the force of her breakdown. Rosa sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. But these were tears of vindication, of justice finally served after 5 years of silent suffering. Judge Judy turned to her with an almost gentle expression. "Miss Mendes, you conducted yourself with dignity and grace throughout this proceeding. I'm sorry you had to endure what you endured. Take this money. Take care of your family and know that you never have to bow down to bullies like her ever again." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. The audience, the court staff, even the camera operators were clapping. Victoria was escorted out by the bailiff, her sobs echoing down the hallway like the ghost of her former arrogance. But the story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Within 6 hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across every social media platform imaginable: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. People shared the moment Victoria called Judge Judy a servant and the devastating 47 seconds that followed. The hashtag #ServantKaren began trending worldwide, racking up over 200 million impressions in the first 24 hours alone. News outlets picked up the story, entitled "Heiress Gets Destroyed by Judge Judy," after calling her a servant became the most clicked headline of the week. Legal commentators praised Judge Judy's handling of the case. Social justice advocates used Victoria as a case study in how privilege enables abuse. Even late-night talk shows featured the clip, with audiences roaring at Victoria's complete humiliation. But the real-world consequences were far more devastating than internet fame. Within 48 hours, 3 of the 5 charity boards she sat on requested her immediate resignation. Their statements were carefully worded but brutally clear. Her behavior was inconsistent with their organizational values. Her country club, where she had been a member for 15 years, suspended her membership pending a review of her conduct. Suddenly, the social circles Victoria had taken for granted were slamming doors in her face. The IRS investigation Judge Judy had mentioned accelerated rapidly once the episode aired. Federal agents arrived at Victoria's estate with warrants and subpoenas. They discovered she hadn't paid proper payroll taxes for household employees in over 6 years, resulting in $340,000 in back taxes, penalties, and fines. Criminal charges for tax evasion and labor law violations were filed, and Victoria faced the very real possibility of prison time. But perhaps the most damaging consequences came from an unexpected source. 12 of Victoria's former household employees, emboldened by Rosa's courage and Judge Judy's validation, came forward with their own stories of abuse, wage theft, and illegal working conditions. They formed a class action lawsuit seeking $2.3 million in damages, back pay, and compensation for emotional distress. The woman who had terrorized employees for decades suddenly faced financial ruin and potential imprisonment. Meanwhile, Rosa Mendes experienced a transformation that restored faith and justice for millions of viewers. The $23,000 judgment allowed her to pay for her daughter's dental surgery that she had been saving for. She enrolled in a nursing assistant certification program, something she had dreamed of for years but couldn't afford. Local businesses, moved by her story, offered her part-time work with flexible hours so she could attend classes. 6 months after the episode aired, Rosa appeared on a Judge Judy follow-up segment. She had completed her CNA certification with honors and was working at a local hospital, where patients loved her gentle care and colleagues respected her professionalism. Her children were thriving, and she had even saved enough to make a down payment on a modest home of her own. When Judge Judy asked how she felt about Victoria now, Rosa's answer reflected the grace that had defined her throughout the ordeal. "I forgive her, Your Honor. I hope she learns to treat people better. Everyone deserves respect no matter what job they do." Victoria's follow-up was far less inspiring. Court sketches from her tax evasion hearing showed a dramatically different woman from the one who had strutted into Judge Judy's courtroom. Gone were the designer clothes and jewelry. Gone was the arrogant posture. She looked tired, defeated, and for the first time in her life, genuinely remorseful. She ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple tax violations, receiving 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory restitution to her former employees. Her family, embarrassed by the public scandal, reduced her trust fund access to a basic living allowance. She was forced to sell her Connecticut estate and move into a modest apartment. But perhaps the most poetic justice came in the form of her community service assignment. The judge, clearly familiar with her case, ordered her to complete 500 hours of service at a women's shelter, cleaning, cooking, and helping the very type of people she had spent her life looking down on. The moral of Victoria Ashford. Wellington's spectacular downfall was crystal clear and resonated with millions of viewers around the world. Privilege without empathy is just cruelty with a bank account. Money can buy comfort, luxury, and social access, but it cannot buy immunity from consequences, respect that isn't earned, or redemption for a lifetime of treating people as less than human. Judge Judy had delivered more than a legal ruling that day. She had given the world a masterclass in why respect matters, why accountability is non-negotiable, and why no amount of wealth can protect you from the consequences of your own cruelty. Justice served. Case closed.